How to structure an argument in 10 easy steps. So the first thing is to decide, what do you want to say? So basically, what's your main point? What are you trying to say? So if you think about it, on the other side of the paper or the essay or whatever it is that you're writing, there is a reader, or at least somebody who's assessing or marking or examining your work. So you need to be very clear in what your point is. And just think about it. When you're speaking to somebody who isn't really focused and really doesn't know what they want to tell you, it's quite frustrating for you to follow or to try and follow what they're saying. So that is exactly the same case in when you are writing anything. You want to make it as easy as possible for the reader to follow. And of course, if it is an argument, you're to a certain extent trying to convince them, even if it's not to agree with you, but to convince that what you're saying is valid and has merit. And you need to make that very clear. So you need to have an overarching argument, and that's basically, what is it that you want to say? So what I recommend is getting a scrap paper and just brainstorming first, and then from the brainstorm, look at what you have. And then just decide, what do I want to say? Can I explain that in a single sentence that makes sense to me? Try and explain it to someone else and see. But essentially, like I said, it's the focus. This is what forms the focus for where you're going to start and what you're going to develop into a discussion throughout your paper or your essay, and basically have the thread that is coherent and cohesive. And those are my favorite words when I'm talking about academic writing, because basically by coherent, I mean something that's logical, that makes sense. And by cohesive, I mean something that comes together quite nicely and easily. So I'd always think about the reader. Think about if you were the reader, would you want to be reading something that is very clearly well defined from the onset? Or do you want to just read something that you have to keep on guessing, what is the person trying to say? I think we all agree that it's much more efficient for us to be able to establish the argument from the onset as early as possible. So basically just decide, what is it I want to say? What's the overarching argument? And just using that as the focus to move forth. So bringing that to my second point, from that, what you want to do is then develop the sub-arguments or the sub-themes. So of course you have your main idea, your main focus, but this is a discussion, and this is something that, you will need to discuss and, elaborate on to be able to really show that you can sustain and engage in a discussion, really. So therefore, you need to look and see, how can I break this down? And of course, your main argument will need to be broken down, because this is what essentially you're going to take and develop into paragraphs throughout. And those paragraphs is basically your discussion throughout your essay or your paper. So what I would do, from the blank paper that you do your brainstorm, essentially take the information from the brainstorm and make a list of bullet points. And these bullet points essentially should be the points or the key phrases or whatever it is that kind of, have been broken down from your main argument. And then what I would recommend doing is then refining and kind of resifting and deciding what then you're going to take and move into the second column. And in this second column, what I would do with the points is actually number them. And I would number them so that it is logical for you, because if it makes sense for you and it's easy for you to follow, then of course it's going to make sense for your reader. So with the points that you've decided, these are your sub arguments and points for discussion, I would then number them in the order that you want to discuss them or develop them in your paragraphs. And of course, it makes sense to start with something that's relatively simple and straightforward, or perhaps with some kind of something that gives a little background or context. And I would encourage you to group these thematically. So by thematically, I mean in a certain theme. In your argument, in your overall argument, think about the different themes that come up. So for example, do you have something perhaps that you're talking about, maybe difficulties and then solutions and changes? You would want to group these together. So think about that. Would you start talking about changes without talking about what the problems are and the solutions? Probably not. So you'd probably talk about something maybe like the challenge, the solutions, and then the changes. That's just an example, but it's just to give you an idea of just basically reordering and organizing your points logically so that it's easy for you to develop and elaborate, with my two favorite words, coherently and cohesively. Okay, so the third point is, now that you have listed and numbered your sub arguments, your subpoints or your sub arguments are going to form your paragraph. So what you need to do with the subpoints that you've numbered is take each one and develop it into a full sentence. So think about, this should be your topic sentence or your introductory sentence for your paragraph. And this will really give you a focus on how to elaborate and develop this into a full paragraph and discussion. This brings me to my fourth point. And in this case, the elaboration and development is essentially forming your paragraph. And by doing this, you'd have to include support. And this has to be from the reading that you've done. So pretty much the literature and how much you've engaged with it. So that brings me to my fifth point. So again, within the paragraph development, what you're going to do is, under each leading sentence, you're going to explain why this argument is important. What does it mean? What does it show? What does it tell us? And remember, here again, you're going to be in convincing mode because you have a reader that you need to convince of your argument. So you've got your topic sentence, but why is this important? What does it mean? What does it show? Try and answer these questions. And of course, when you answer them, you're going to do it in sentence format. And then by this is where you're going to incorporate your evidence in, because obviously when you're trying to prove these points, you again need to go back to the literature and find the evidence that support this. So this brings me to the sixth point, which is you need to include the support. Okay. So the support, essentially the evidence. So think of this as your backup. When you are saying something in day-to-day life, you generally have some kind of backup, whether it's a friend to back up your claim or something that you saw online, you'll kind of refer to it. Therefore, an academic essay essentially isn't much different. You will need to show that you have evidence from the literature. And in this case, you would need to cite this and reference it. Now, the way to do this depends on your discipline. Different disciplines have different ways. So you need to check this, whether you'll be using the Harvard style or a different style. Generally, Harvard is the most common, but there are other styles. So just check that. But you would need to cite it and reference this. Because not doing this will mean that you're making unsubstantiated claims, which basically isn't okay in academic writing at all. So make sure you don't do that. So that brings me to the seventh point. So this, after you've supported this, you want to develop this further. And this is really where the brownie points in. So I have mentioned before, I get students who say to me, oh, I want the highest mark or whatever. And so far, so good. But if you really want to impress, this is where you are going to really show your criticality. And this is where you've established your point, you've provided the support. Obviously, hopefully, you've said what it shows and why it's important. But then you're going to go a step further here and you're going to see, okay, so, but can you develop this further? Are there counter arguments? Are there limitations? Is this, are there flaws within the evidence that you have found, or within the the support for the argument? And why is that important? What does it show? What's the hot topic of the debate essentially here? This is really where you, like I said, can demonstrate your criticality. You can really show your evaluative skills. This takes practice, of course, so I appreciate that this isn't easy, and this does take skill and practice. And of course, I will be doing more content on this to show you how to necessarily do this, high-tech skill, but it can be done, and it's something that you should be aware of. Even if you can't master it as of yet, just be aware of this and be aware of being able to develop this, because this is essentially where the bonus points are. So you're looking at developing further by checking, are there any counter arguments? Are there limitations? And if there are, what does it show? Why is it important? And how does it affect what you're saying, basically? Moving on to the 8th point, again, we need to remember to remain cohesive. So within everything you've said, let's say you've dealt with the first paragraph, now you need to make sure that you link the sub arguments and your sub sentences. So again, like I said, remember to be thematic. So what is your theme? Don't jump from point to point. Make sure you're dealing, perhaps grouping different themes together. So for example, like I gave you, you'll have your difficulties, your solutions, and the changes. Just make sure that you're putting the arguments in the relevant sections within the paragraphs and, of course, the essay or the paper as a whole. So then moving on to the 9th point, then what you want to do is draw all the arguments together and basically summarize. So be careful here not to regurgitate everything, because obviously that's not the purpose of a summary. The summary here is just basically to tie everything together. So kind of bring everything together with a nice bow, perhaps, like to, present it, but also just to briefly remind what's being touched upon. So again, this ties in back to the overarching argument and what you're trying to what you've tried to establish from the onset. So just bring everything together in a summary and kind of tie it up. And then the final point is outline this and make it clear. So go back to your introduction and see, what you spotlighted as your focus. Just make sure that you have kind of done a 360 and come back so the reader is clear again. You've kind of set out what you said you were going to essentially discuss and prove. You should have done that in the discussion paragraphs, main body, and then in the end kind of just reposition yourself and just clarify that what you said at the beginning is pretty much still the stance, because and this is what I find, especially when I'm marking, is somebody who's told me something from the onset and then completely changed and told me something else in the conclusion. This definitely isn't good, because what it shows me is that you're not clear on what your argument is. The thread needs to be consistent throughout. You need to maintain your positionality, because remember, it's an argument, so you should know what your point was. And this is why I said establish your main point from the onset, elaborate, develop and discuss it, and then at the end come back to the point and re-establish it and really stamp it and kind of seal it, and then you're done. So basically there you have your thread. I appreciate this takes practice, and that's fine. I definitely will be doing workshops on this and perhaps showing you examples of good arguments that are set out, and also arguments that perhaps didn't really make the cut. I have plenty of those. But in the meantime, I also have resources to guide you, specifically downloadable templates that give you like 5 easy steps to kind of do this within a paragraph. So make sure to check that out. Everything is in the description bar. I'd appreciate a thumbs up so that I know to make videos like this or similar videos. And that's it, guys. So happy writing, as I say to everyone in my community. And like I said, practice does make perfect. If this is the first time you're kind of stumbled across this and you think, oh my God, you're not alone. It does take practice. Academic writing, I always say that I favor a process approach of basically refining yourself, improving yourself before you ever reach any kind of level of near perfection. So it's all part of the journey, and I'm happy to be here to be part of that journey to help you in achieving your academic success. So thank you for watching.